I remember 9/11 very vividly. Um, it's one of those dates, one of those infamous dates in American history where you just don't really forget. You never really forget. Prior generations, I guess, their moment like this was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Pearl Harbor, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's just certain days that you just don't forget. And on that particular day, September 11th, 2001, I remember where I was. I was 21 years old at the time. And just before I went to work, virtually every day, I always got a newspaper, Richmond Times-Dispatch, morning newspaper. And I remember reading, I guess you all could tell, I'm kind of a little bit of a sports guy, a little bit more so now than I was then. But I was so interested in sports then. I remember reading, when I was interested in baseball during the home run era, I remember reading a sports article, talking about the little home run chase. Really, it was Bonds, but they mentioned Sosa. I think at the time Barry had maybe like, I don't know, 63 home runs or 62. I can't remember. I think he had just hit about 60, and Sosa had like 52. I think that's what. I think Bonds had like maybe 60 homers, and Sosa had like 51 or 52, and he was kind of like getting really behind. And I remember talking about that, and football season had just started, I believe, that weekend prior, and the Baltimore Ravens were the defending champions, and I had no idea that the New England Patriots were just beginning their damn dominance in our division. I think Drew Bledsoe was the starter at that time. Had no idea that Bledsoe would get injured and Tom Brady would get in the starting rotation, and then the rest would be history. But anyway, just a normal day. I read my newspaper. This was like maybe 8:30 or so. And I was eating breakfast, and I was in the cafeteria, and there was a radio. There was a company called Aramark that would serve breakfast, whatever. And there was a radio that could be heard throughout the cafeteria at work. And I remember it was Bill Bevins on the radio in the morning. And he was, just playing music, whatever. I think his channel was called Light 98 or something like that. They're playing music, I don't know, maybe some shit like Steve Winwood, Bring Me a Higher Love. Oh yeah, bring me a higher love. Oh yeah, bring me a higher love. Some shit like that or something. And all of a sudden, Bill Bevins He cut the music and said there was a report of a plane hitting the World Trade Center. Now, at first, when I'm hearing this, right, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's probably it's two things. Either it's a private plane that lost, by some guy who's an inexperienced pilot who maybe became disorientated somehow and he just accidentally hit into the World Trade Center, or if it wasn't that, it was, some nut job who would, try to do something, and he talked about that. He said it. He said there was a plane that hit the World Trade Center. So I'm thinking it's still like a small, like, little private plane, you know what I'm saying? So I'm thinking, like, wow, damn, what the fuck happened? I'm thinking that the building did more damage to the plane than the plane did to the building. For whatever reason, I'm thinking that. And then they cut away, went back to music, and then they came back and was giving a little bit more detail, saying there was reports of heavy damage to the tower. Okay, so I'm thinking, like, what the hell happened? So I'm getting a little bit more and more curious. So Then, about, what was it, maybe 18 minutes later, 20 minutes later, that's when I heard the report that there was a second plane that hit the World Trade Center. And when I heard about the second plane, that's when I knew, because, you know what I'm saying, like, I follow politics and I follow global events and global leaders and different things. Back then I was following domestic terrorism and foreign terrorism, all this stuff. That's when I knew then that this was a terrorist act. This wasn't an accident. And I remember the guy who was the chief building engineer. It's kind of weird, man. It was this guy who was Asian, but he had a southern accent. I mean, I'm not trying to sound racist, but I just never had heard a guy who was Asian with a southern accent. But anyway, he was like, "What the hell's going on?" You know, something. He was like, you know, "Man, what the hell's going on up there?" You know, something like that. And I remember looking at him and I said, "You know what? I think this was Osama bin Laden did this. I think Osama bin Laden's behind this." And he was like, "Who?" I said, "Osama bin Laden, man. He's a terrorist. He's a leader of Al Qaeda." And he's always, you know, I've heard him say in interviews that he was, the few times that the West interviewed him, that he was planning on doing something like this. And I know some of you guys are not going to believe me when I say this. You think I'm lying. But I'm not like that other guy on YouTube, the delusional dude who thinks he's important and makes up shit. I'm being honest. I remember January of 2001. I lied to you not. I lied to you not. I never lie to you guys when I do YouTube videos. I remember seeing an article in Slam magazine. I've told this story to a couple of my friends before. There was an article where a guy was saying that it was basketball related, but for some reason he put this in an article. He said, "I had heard rumors." I forgot why he mentioned terrorism, but he was saying something about he had seen on the internet that Osama bin Laden had been planning for months, and that sometime this year there will be a terrorist attack in the United States using planes. To this day, I don't know why I did not keep that book, because I thought it was like bullshit for some reason. It wasn't in any of the main articles. It was like in those letters to the editor portion of the beginning part of the Slam magazine. If anybody ever read that book, please verify this for me. I know this is a long time ago, but I'm not lying when I say this. And I remember later on, maybe 15 minutes later, I was such in a state of shock that I went to look at television. I think I looked at NBC because everybody was looking at television, and we saw the footage of the planes hitting the towers. And the crazy thing about it is that it looked like, it looked literally like something out of a movie. It was just eerie. It was eerie. It was surreal. It was like, what the fuck is this? And what was it, like 30 minutes later, one of the towers just collapsed. And you could hear the real emotion of the journalists. Like, they really literally were emotionally distraught at what they were seeing. And we were all distraught, and some of the women were crying, and some of the women were upset because they knew people that worked in that building. Some of the men were upset because they knew people that worked in that building. So I remember that day I was just in a total state of shock, an absolute total state of shock. And it was an event altering. That event, 9/11, completely altered all of our consciousness, the way we saw the world, because we always thought we were invincible. I remember back in the 1990s, folks, Bob Dornan, who was a California congressman, Republican. And I'm not a Republican. I have to give credit where credit is due. He always warned that in the United States we had this false sense of security, that these types of things were foreign to us. Like for some reason we feel like we have this this impenetrable force field around the United States borders, and that terrorism was relegated to things happening in Africa, like the embassy, and Iran and Iraq and all those countries, those third world countries where they don't have any discipline and they're just a bunch of, violent hooligans over there. I'm not saying this, I'm just saying why people have this perception. And he said we're really vulnerable to domestic terrorism here in the United States. And that's how I learned about Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda and whatnot back in the mid to late 90s. So I remember bin Laden was behind the African embassy. And then people forget this, but a year prior to that, in the summer of 2000, it was that terrorist act on the U.S. Cole, which was the USS Cole. I think it was the USS Cole. So it was coming. This was a long planned out event. Now I understand something, and you're barking up the wrong tree if you come at me with this. There's going to be some people say, Mike, you're a sheep. Don't you know that it was an inside job? Yada, 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 yada. Number one, I'm not trying to get my video flagged. All right? I'm very perceptive of YouTube policies. I have my theories. Some of them will be considered kooky. So, I'm not talking about who committed or who was involved in this. Because like I said, I have my theories about 9/11, just like all of you guys do. And just like how I feel about the Kennedy assassination, there's a lot more than meets the eye. But I'm not going to talk about that in this video. Okay? Not in this video. This is purely about the event as we saw it. Alright? I have my theories and my beliefs about who I think was behind it, what was behind it, what was the reasons behind it, what was the ultimate goal. But anyway, I remember later on when I was just walking around the city, got off work and I was just walking around. I was downtown, and never before had I seen anything like that before. It was a literal ghost town. We were pretty much under. It's pretty much like the entire country was pretty much on alert. It was an act of war. I remember coming home, and you know how you guys, some of you younger guys who are teenagers or really young looking at TV now, like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. You notice how there's a constant scroll across the screen? Well, before that day, 9/11, that didn't occur. It only occurred when there was a breaking news story. It wasn't until September the 11th that these networks started having the constant scroll across the screen. I remember when I got home, September the 11th, they were talking about, of course, what happened. None of us knew exactly how many people got killed. Ultimately, it was 3,000 people. It was the most people officially that got killed in one day since the Civil War, though I have my beliefs that there might have been other events where more than that have been killed in one day. We've had, Black Wall Street. We've had riots that, it's sort of undocumented about how many people have died. But let's just go with the story that that's the most people that have died since the Civil War. And had this occurred during the middle portion of the day rather than early in the morning, I think the death toll would have been much, much, much higher. Probably more in the 10 to 15,000 range as far as people being killed. Maybe even as much as 20,000, because a lot of people had not even come to work yet. And later on, there was talk about, there was going to be terrorist attacks in Boston. Even Richmond came up where I lived at, scared the shit out of me. Then, a little bit after 9/11, that's when we had the anthrax attacks, where people were sending shit in the mail. We even had a scare in my building, in my part-time job, where somebody had sent a letter, to the department where they intercept mail, and there was white powder in there, trying to be a hoax. But I mean, it was just a whole different world just came upon us after 9/11. Then several months later, maybe a year or so after that, you had the DC snipers, and then we went to the war. I mean, everything just changed. It's almost like, I remember reading about, what was it, February 28th, 1959. I think it was the date when you had Richie Valens, the Big Bopper, and Buddy Holly died in that plane crash, and they called it the day the music died, because you had three of the greatest and the, most significant musical artists all perishing in one day. It was like a whole era of music just died. Well, if that was the day the music died, then September 11th, 2001 is the day when American innocence died. But those are my thoughts on 9/11. Tell me what you guys think, and tell me your guys' memories as well.